This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 348 of the Late Round Podcast, one of many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. A few things to mention before getting to today's questions. I made a couple of mistakes on the show earlier this week, and I want to clear it up. I want to clear things up. The first thing is about N'Keal Harry. Now, on the show, I mentioned that he had about a 20% chance of hitting given his rookie season numbers. But I phrased things really poorly. I should have just not included that piece because it didn't make sense. What I really meant to say was, if we were to assume that Harry would be successful, only 20% of players in that successful wide receiver data set were as bad as he was during their rookie seasons. Now, that single statistic obviously wasn't the crux of the argument with selling N'Keal Harry. The idea was that he just wasn't productive during his rookie year, and like I talked about in the unproductive rookie season episode a couple of weeks ago, that's not a great sign. Generally speaking, good fantasy assets were good when they were rookies. And the only truly elite wideout that we've seen with numbers as bad as Harry's during their rookie season was with Antonio Brown. But when I mentioned the statistic, I phrased it poorly and I wanted to address it. Now, the other thing that my idiot self screwed up on that show is that I accidentally said that Raheem Mostert was going to be 38 years old next season. Clearly, I misspoke and I didn't catch that when editing the show. Should have been 28, not 38. He's actually not old enough to be your dad. The last thing to mention before getting into this week's questions is that you guys should check out FanDuel's XFL contests. If you have no idea who's even playing in the XFL, I've got a primer over on numberfire.com for this week's slates that can help you out. But head to FanDuel.com, click the XFL tab, and make some lineups. This first question is from Twitter. It's from @TJSumter54. When building the first 3 rounds of a redraft, do you always go best available, or do you try to do 2 running backs, 1 wide receiver, or depending on draft position, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, and 1 tight end? Look, I try to be flexible. Tight end is generally not a position that I draft early for reasons that I talked through on a show last summer on tight end strategy. It was episode 261. But it's a onesie position. You're only starting 1 player at that position in your lineup, so it's inherently devalued. It makes more sense to go early round tight end than early round quarterback, but there always seems to be a team or two who wants a guy like Kelsey more than I do. Best player available as an idea is kind of BS though. It's impossible to strictly go with a BPA type approach without factoring in things like positional scarcity, which is why we're not even discussing quarterbacks in this question. You're already doing that. You naturally do this when you're drafting. I just don't like the phrase. Best player available should be best value available. And the same goes for the real NFL draft. Maybe it's a stupid thing to even bring up, but I think it's important. But it all depends on league format and where I'm drafting. If I'm in a standard non-PPR league with no flex spot and I'm starting 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers, I'll likely pound the running back position early. I might start with 3 running backs, but I'm always cognizant of tiers and what I can get with my subsequent picks. This next question is an email. It says, "Hi JJ, huge fan of the show, have been for a long time. Thanks. With the offseason upon us, I couldn't help but pick up an orphan dynasty team. It's my first dynasty team ever, Superflex tight end premium. I made a couple of trades right away, and now the team has Lamar and Wentz, Kittle and Andrews, but it's lacking at running back with basically Melvin Gordon and Darius Geis as the only 2 viable options. My question is, since my team wasn't a playoff contender under the previous owner, should I trade Lamar for a low-end QB1 plus a couple of startable assets, or hang on to what could be a high-end QB1 for years to come? Basically, I'm new to all this, and I don't know how to manage a dynasty team. Please help, Josh." So you're clearly set at quarterback and tight end, which is great. If you're set or reasonably set at wide receiver, I actually would consider staying put. And the logic is that I'm assuming that you've got some sort of high rookie selection in this year's rookie draft if the team was bad last year. This year's running back class is pretty strong, so you could fill those gaps via the rookie draft. Basically, what I'm saying here is that if you have a hole at running back, that's going to be the easiest hole to fill in year 1 with a rookie. We know that rookie backs perform better than rookie wideouts. I actually did a study on rookie pick evaluation a couple of years back, and front half of round 1 rookie backs are by far the best assets to draft for year 1 production. It's not close. It's also probably not that surprising. So if you have one of those, and here's the important thing, if you're trying to win in 2020, then I wouldn't be overly worried about running back, actually. And if your wide receivers are good, then all of a sudden you've got a pretty complete team. There are a lot of factors to consider with a question like this, but I would say to either just get one of those backs this year, and if you don't have one of those picks, or if you're worried about getting a good running back, then you should start planning for 2021. If you don't think that you're going to be competitive, it's okay to build for the following year and create a powerhouse. I also think that you should always consider trading anyone. Everyone has a price and can be sold. So even if you're competing this year, still see what you can get for Lamar Jackson. It can't hurt. That was quite the brain vomit, but hopefully you can get something out of that answer. It's kind of impossible to be super direct when I'm not staring at your roster. This next question is from Jake. It says, do you have any advice for getting some less than willing dynasty owners to start trading? Love the show. Thanks. Now, if you really want a trade done and the person's just not budging because they obnoxiously overvalue their own players, you can always just take a deal that's below market value. Like if your goal is to just get a deal done, sometimes you have to make some sacrifices. And to that point, make sure your trade offers are objectively fair. That's important. But some people just don't like trading that much. Sometimes you can't do anything about that. It's stupid and it's annoying, but a fantasy football podcast host isn't going to be able to convince one of your friends that making trades is fun. Your job is to explain why the trade makes sense and why the trade makes both of your teams better. Explain why you're doing the trade and explain the thought process as to why the trade benefits both teams. Because that's the goal of trading in the end. There's going to be a winner and a loser in the long run. But at the time of the transaction, both sides should appear to make both teams better. This next question is from @Marcelo_Unda. Is Eckler greater than Bell? I thought this was a really interesting question and thought. I'm assuming this is dynasty focused, and according to DynastyLeagueFootball.com's ADP data, Eckler is indeed ranked ahead of Le'Veon Bell. And I think that's logical. I do expect the Chargers to have someone in that backfield with Eckler next season. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a workhorse. It's in his range of outcomes, but I think the most likely outcome is that he's still splitting work. And there's some ambiguity now with Phillip Rivers no longer being there. But Eckler's over 3 years younger, he was more productive in 2019, and depending on the quarterback situation, he could end up in a better overall environment than Le'Veon Bell has. I think Eckler's probably a safer bet. But I also low-key think that Le'Veon Bell's an interesting buy low for a team who's looking to compete in the short term. Because he's older, he's coming off a bad year, and people aren't necessarily high on the Jets' offense. That presents a buy low opportunity if you think that he's going to see a lot of volume next year and maybe the year after. I think that volume is at least going to be on his side in 2020. As of now, though, give me Austin Eckler. This next question is from @TSteppen. We saw DeVante Parker become a valuable fantasy asset this past season when Preston Williams went down with an injury mid-season. With Williams returning, are you concerned that Parker might not return on draft investment in 2020, and would you consider him a sell in Dynasty? So let's not overstate the impact that Preston Williams and that injury had on DeVante Parker. Williams played until week 10. Through that point in time, Parker was averaging a 20.2% target share per game. After Williams went down, that number rose to 22.3%. That's not that significant. And the thing is, Parker also averaged just a 15.7% target share in the 2 games where Ryan Fitzpatrick either didn't play a whole lot, which was week 3, or when he didn't start, which was week 4. If you look at games with Ryan Fitzpatrick, then we're only talking about a 0.8% target share per game difference with and without Preston Williams. Now, of course, Parker ended up producing more without Preston Williams. His fantasy points per game average was significantly higher during the second half of the year. But during the first half, Miami also faced Baltimore, New England, the Chargers, the Bills, the Steelers. They had a much tougher schedule than during the second half of the year. Down the stretch, they went up against the Giants, Bengals, and Eagles. It wasn't that tough or as tough for DeVante Parker. Because Fitzpatrick seems to be in their 2020 plans, I don't think I'd be looking to sell Parker. Everyone has a price, like I said, but DeVante Parker's surge is more Ryan Fitzpatrick related than it is Preston Williams related, in my opinion. This next question says, hey JJ, what are your thoughts on selling Aaron Jones in Dynasty? A lot of his points last year came from touchdowns, which will be unsustainable. His value will surely never be higher. What would you be looking at getting in return for him? Thanks, Alex. Okay, so I rarely answer the what would you be looking to get in return for him questions because I think it defeats the purpose of trading. It's a backwards way of looking at things. Your goal isn't to force a certain player onto a different team. Your goal is to find a team who needs what you're offering or who values a player more than you do, and then you should trade that player to that team. So find a team that needs a running back or a team that really overvalues Aaron Jones. That's your trade partner. I'm sure that manager will have plenty of usable assets to trade for. To the point of this question, though, with Aaron Jones being a sell, yes, I think he's more on the sell side than the buy side. I've talked a lot about how unsustainable his touchdown production was this past year, so I won't revisit that. But if someone's buying into that, then sure, try to get rid of Aaron Jones. The fact that someone like DJ Moore is being drafted right next to him in dynasty startups, that's crazy to me. I'd rather have Moore by a pretty big margin. But the thing with Jones, I do think that he's sort of the last running back or in that last running back tier before you get into true question marks. He and Miles Sanders are right next to one another in ADP, and after that, you get into guys like Melvin Gordon, Kerryon Johnson, that type of territory where their workloads are more up in the air. With Jones, you should feel pretty good about his 1 to 2 year outlook. And one additional thought before moving on, Jones is 25 years old right now. He's already played 3 NFL seasons. What happens when his contract is up? That's a question that you've always got to ask and be worried about with running backs. So that's just another reason that selling now at a peak isn't a terrible idea. This last question is from @TylerStrong95. What's the next advancement for fantasy football? A new standard for scoring, folks switching to victory points format en masse, best ball becoming the standard, etc. So the way I've always viewed the fantasy gamer is that with every season, people playing fantasy football get more into it. People just get more involved. Years ago, people only cared about touchdowns in fantasy. Then they started caring about yards, and then keeper leagues got more popular. And now we're seeing dynasty leagues becoming more and more popular because people can't get enough and they want to do stuff year round. So I think dynasty is absolutely going to get bigger. Now, regarding scoring and lineup settings, the only way that things will change at a large scale, and I think I mentioned this before on the show, is if sites like ESPN and Yahoo make those changes the norm. If the standard format on ESPN, let's say, is a superflex format, then that's what's going to start this change. But until we see that happen, I don't think the format itself is going to change in a huge, huge way. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. And remember, with the off-season mailbags, feel free to email me at jj@numberfire.com with any questions. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.